Most people spend their entire lives believing wealth leaves clues. A luxury car, a big house, an expensive watch. The people who looked successful were supposed to be the wealthy ones. My grandfather shattered that belief. For 42 years, he worked the night shift as a janitor in one of the busiest financial districts in the country. Every evening, after the closing bell rang and the traders headed home, he stepped inside with nothing more than a mop, a bucket, and a ring of old keys. To the people rushing past him, he was invisible. But what nobody realized was that being invisible inside that building came with an unexpected advantage. No one imagined that the quiet janitor cleaning their offices would one day leave behind more money than many of the executives who worked inside them. When Grandpa passed away, our family expected a simple inheritance: his old pickup truck, some worn-out tools, a few family photographs, maybe enough savings to cover the funeral. Instead, the lawyer opened a folder, looked around the room, and read a number that left every one of us speechless. Grandpa had quietly built a fortune worth several $1,000,000, not through a lottery ticket, not through an inheritance, not by starting a business, just from a janitor's paycheck. How could someone who lived so modestly, drove the same truck for nearly 20 years, and wore patched work boots accumulate that kind of wealth? The answer wasn't hidden in a bank account. It was hidden in an old metal toolbox sitting in the corner of his garage. Inside was a weathered notebook. Its pages were stained, its cover was cracked, and every line had been written in Grandpa's careful handwriting over 4 decades. It was a collection of lessons. Not lessons about picking the perfect stock, not secret investment strategies, not insider information. They were observations. And what I will tell you next is how every lesson in that notebook came from moments no one else even paid attention to. Thousands of quiet moments spent watching some of the smartest and wealthiest people on Wall Street make decisions when they thought no one was paying attention. But the most important lesson in that notebook wasn't written at the beginning. It was buried at the very end. Grandpa wasn't studying the market. He was studying the people who believed they had mastered it. And one sentence appeared over and over again throughout that notebook: Wall Street doesn't need you to lose. It only needs you to keep changing your mind. At first, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But page by page, story by story, that notebook revealed something I had never considered before. The people making the biggest fortunes weren't always the ones predicting the future. Sometimes they were the ones quietly profiting from everyone else's fear, excitement, and constant need to act. But what I will tell you next completely changes how you see financial news, because the first lesson Grandpa wrote down didn't start in a classroom. It started with a trash can. But what he saw inside that office wasn't just chaos. It was the first clue that the entire system was built differently than people believed. At first, that sounded ridiculous. How could someone's path to wealth begin with garbage? That's exactly what I wondered. Then I turned the page. It was sometime in the early 1980s. Grandpa didn't write the exact date. He simply called it the day fear took over the building. The stock market had fallen hard. By the time the closing bell rang, television anchors were using the same words over and over again: panic, historic losses, investors flee. People who normally walked with confidence hurried through the halls carrying stacks of reports under their arms. Even after the markets closed, lights stayed on in offices that were usually empty by evening. When the last executives finally left, Grandpa began his nightly routine. He emptied coffee cups, straightened chairs, vacuumed the carpets. Then he rolled his trash cart into one executive's office. Something immediately caught his attention. The wastebasket was overflowing, not with lunch wrappers, not with empty coffee cups, with shredded documents, research reports, investment plans, pages covered in handwritten notes, even printed stock charts ripped into tiny pieces. And that was the first lesson Grandpa wanted me to understand. The market doesn't destroy most people's plans. Fear does. The next morning, Grandpa noticed something even more interesting. The same executive walked into the office carrying an entirely new stack of reports, new predictions, new recommendations. A completely different strategy. Yesterday's plan had already been replaced. Grandpa began noticing the same pattern everywhere. Nobody stayed with one strategy for very long. That's when Grandpa wrote another sentence. And this one was underlined 3 times. The market wasn't charging them for changing their minds. People were. He wasn't talking about some secret conspiracy. He was talking about incentives. Every time someone rushed to buy, someone earned a commission. Every time someone sold everything in panic, someone processed the trade. Every time investors abandoned one strategy to chase another, another product was waiting to be sold. Grandpa realized something that almost nobody around him seemed to notice. Wall Street didn't need people to be right. It simply needed them to keep moving. Because movement creates business. Patience doesn't. That doesn't mean every financial professional has bad intentions. Far from it. But the system itself has a simple incentive. The more often money changes hands, the more opportunities there are for someone to earn a fee. Grandpa couldn't stop thinking about that idea. On the bus ride home that morning, he wrote a question across an entire page of the notebook. If everyone profits when I keep changing direction, what happens if I stop? That single question would quietly shape every financial decision he made for the next 40 years. And it led him to a habit so simple that almost nobody believed it could work. Ironically, it was also the one habit most of the executives upstairs struggled to follow. But before Grandpa committed to it, he uncovered another trap one that keeps millions of ordinary people glued to financial news every single day, convinced that tomorrow's headline will finally reveal the secret to getting rich. Grandpa always said there was one thing he found stranger than the market itself. It was the people who claimed they always knew where it was going next. People with degrees from prestigious universities and decades of experience studying the markets. If anyone could predict tomorrow, surely it was them. But the longer Grandpa watched them, the more one question bothered him. If they could really predict the future, why were their predictions always changing? Night after night, while wiping down conference tables after everyone had gone home, Grandpa noticed fresh reports waiting on nearly every desk. One week, the headlines were full of confidence. The market has plenty of room to climb. A new bull market is just beginning. The following month, those reports had disappeared. In their place were brand new predictions. A recession may be around the corner. Investors should prepare for difficult times. A few months later, another set of reports. Another new story. Another reason people needed to reposition their money immediately. Predictions expire faster than milk. I realized he wasn't mocking the experts. He was pointing out something much deeper. Predictions aren't valuable because they last. They're valuable because they keep people paying attention. Think about it. If someone confidently announced, nothing special is going to happen this year, keep investing like you always do, would that become the biggest headline on television? Probably not. But tell people a crash is coming, or that a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is about to disappear, and suddenly everyone is watching. Because our brains are wired to pay attention to urgency. Fear grabs our attention. Excitement does too. And both emotions make us feel like we need to act. That was the second lesson, hidden inside his notebook. Urgency is often more profitable than certainty. One evening, Grandpa overheard two executives talking as they walked toward the elevator. The first man said, "Clients want answers. We have to tell them something." The second replied, "I just wish they understood that nobody really knows what's going to happen next quarter." Grandpa never forgot that conversation because it reminded him that even the professionals were dealing with uncertainty. The difference was, many ordinary investors believed certainty was being sold. Grandpa wasn't cynical about it. He simply accepted an uncomfortable truth. The future has never belonged to the loudest prediction. It belongs to the people who can stay disciplined when nobody knows what's coming. That realization completely changed the way he invested. He stopped asking, "What do the experts think will happen next month?" Instead, he asked a much simpler question. Will people still be building businesses, buying groceries, inventing new technologies, and going to work 20 years from now? If the answer was yes, then he kept investing. He refused to let tomorrow's prediction decide what he would do with today's paycheck. That one decision quietly removed one of the biggest enemies of long-term wealth, emotion. And that's a lesson anyone can apply, even if they've never bought a single stock. When headlines drive decisions, your emotions become your financial advisor. When decisions are driven by a plan, headlines lose their power. Grandpa thought this was one of the most important discoveries in his notebook. He was wrong. Because a few years later, while cleaning one of the executive dining rooms, he noticed something that completely challenged everything people assume about being rich. The executives with the biggest offices weren't always the wealthiest people in the building. And once Grandpa figured out why, he stopped trying to look wealthy and started quietly becoming wealthy instead. Grandpa used to think the biggest offices belonged to the richest people. It seemed obvious. The corner offices had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The desks were made of polished wood. The chairs cost more than his pickup truck. Every morning, luxury cars lined the street outside, and expensive watches flashed under perfectly tailored suit sleeves. For years, Grandpa quietly admired them. These were the people television called financial geniuses, the people newspapers interviewed whenever the market made headlines. But somewhere around his 20th year working in that building, Grandpa noticed something that didn't fit the picture. The people who looked the richest often seemed the most worried. One executive stood out more than anyone else. Every few years, he upgraded everything. A bigger house, a newer luxury car, more expensive suits, a private golf club membership, the nicest office on the entire floor. From the outside, he looked like the definition of success. But whenever the market stumbled, Grandpa noticed something strange. That executive wasn't calm. He wasn't patient. He was terrified. Late at night, after most of the staff had gone home, Grandpa would see him pacing back and forth through his office, calculator in hand. Then one morning, Grandpa overheard a conversation that stayed with him for the rest of his life. The executive had quietly put his vacation home up for sale, not because he wanted to, because he had to. A few difficult months had stretched his finances so thin that the lifestyle everyone admired had become a burden he could no longer carry. That night, Grandpa opened his notebook and wrote one simple sentence. Looking wealthy and being wealthy are two different jobs. Whenever Grandpa received a raise, he pretended it never happened. Before he bought anything new, he increased the amount he invested. If he got an extra $100, part of it immediately went toward his future before he had a chance to spend it. His lifestyle improved slowly. His investments grew quietly. And over 40 years, that tiny habit became one of the biggest reasons his wealth kept growing. Years later, he wrote another sentence underneath the first. Wealth is what you keep. Status is what you spend. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how true it was. But almost nobody celebrates the money quietly sitting in an investment account, patiently growing year after year. Because real wealth is usually invisible, and perhaps that's why so many people miss it. Grandpa believed Wall Street understood something about human nature. That desire keeps money moving. It encourages bigger purchases, bigger risks, and the feeling that you're always one upgrade away from finally making it. But Grandpa discovered that lasting wealth rarely comes from chasing appearances. It comes from quietly building assets while nobody is paying attention. By now, his notebook was filled with lessons. Fear, predictions, lifestyle, patience. Each one explained a different mistake he had watched intelligent people make. But on the very last page, Grandpa reduced 42 years of watching Wall Street to a single sentence. Just 12 words. According to him, those 12 words explained why a janitor quietly became a millionaire, while people earning 10 times his salary never did. And just when I thought I had understood everything he was trying to teach me, I turned the final page. But what I will tell you next is the final lesson that made everything else look incomplete. I expected one final investment secret. Instead, there was only one sentence, written neatly across the center of an otherwise blank page. The less often you need to make financial decisions, the richer you'll probably become. I realized what he meant. Every mistake he'd written about came from the same place. Fear made people change their plans. Predictions convinced them tomorrow required a different strategy. A bigger paycheck tempted them into a bigger lifestyle. Different stories. The same mistake. People kept interrupting their own future. Grandpa was saying the best decisions are often the ones you make once, then allow time to do the rest. He built a simple system. Every payday, money automatically went into his investments. He lived below his means. He ignored the noise. And then, he got on with his life. While everyone else spent years trying to outsmart the market, Grandpa was quietly letting consistency do what brilliance rarely could. Compound. That was the rule. Simply building a life where good financial habits happened automatically, leaving fewer opportunities for fear, greed, or headlines to interfere. Grandpa used to write in the margin of his notebook, "Discipline is making one good decision that saves you from making 100 emotional ones." Looking back, that may have been the greatest lesson of all. When Grandpa died, people talked about the money he left behind. But after reading his notebook, I realized the fortune wasn't the most valuable thing he passed down. The mindset was. For 42 years, he quietly watched some of the smartest people in finance. And he learned something most people never do. Wealth isn't built by making hundreds of brilliant decisions. It's built by making a handful of good decisions and refusing to abandon them every time the world gets noisy. That's why Grandpa never tried to predict the next market crash. He never chased every exciting opportunity. He simply stayed patient while others stayed busy. Maybe that's why so many people overlooked him. Real wealth rarely looks exciting while it's being built. It grows quietly, one paycheck, one investment, one disciplined decision at a time. Wall Street will always have another prediction, another product, another reason to believe that this time is different, because activity keeps the machine running. But Grandpa discovered something the machine can't easily sell: patience, consistency, and the courage to stick with a simple plan when everyone else is searching for a complicated one. The old notebook still sits on my bookshelf. Its pages are faded. The cover is worn. And every now and then, I open it to that last sentence. Not because it's complicated, but because it's easy to forget. The less often you need to make financial decisions, the richer you'll probably become. Maybe that was the fortune Grandpa was trying to leave behind all along. Not millions of dollars, but a way of thinking that almost anyone can start using today. I still picture Grandpa the way everyone else saw him: a quiet old man, pushing a mop down an empty hallway after the markets closed. They thought he was cleaning up after Wall Street. They never realized Wall Street was quietly teaching him how not to become like them.